Andrews. How are you?
I'm well. Good to see you.
Always good to see you, especially after having not been able to see you for such a long time. We finally reconnected just this past year, and I've talked to you a bunch lately. I like it.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? It's like we went through all those years of seeing each other on a pretty regular basis,
Hmm.
through the help of Rick Parkhill and Nine Media and
Yeah,
Toby, and
yeah,
then life changed, and here we are back again, full
yeah,
circle, 360 for 180.
absolutely. And speaking of life changes, you just started something new, correct?
Indeed, indeed. So I had just started over at Ogilvy Consulting, and I joined to help to stand up and grow the AI practice um, within the organization, working between New York and London.
Cool. And
But
you've been kind of playing around, dabbling in, and basically writing and pontificating about AI for a while now. So, tell me why Ogilvy? What's Ogilvy going to be doing that's maybe different or taking a different tactic, or what are you hoping to achieve?
yeah, the great thing about it is that Ogilvy comes with this deep history of creativity and this deep history of being able to create uh, connections with major brands
Hmm.
and audiences, right? And they've done that for time and time and time again. For you name it, the story brand, they've done it for them. The amazing thing with AI is that now we have a whole nother medium, a whole nother piece of technology that's going to allow us to be able to gain insights, develop creative, develop copy, and take connections and deliver connection points to audiences at scale, just using a whole nother set of different types of technology, and be able to do that for brands with deep intention.
Hmm. And you're right. Ogilvy has been a name associated with creativity for a really long time. Like when I started in advertising, Ogilvy was here. When you started advertising, it was here. Like it's been around for a long time. It's actually, if you kind of think back, it's interesting. It's one of the only names in the agency world that has weathered all the storms of the last 20, 30 years, really.
It still remains, right?
Yeah.
And and the amazing thing about it is now with Ogilvy Consulting, right? When you look at the traditional consulting model, right, it puts us in a position where we get to solve some of the big clients that organizations are having or will have, or some of the challenges and transformations that they'll have to make just to stay ahead of the curve in
Mhm.
terms of what's happening in society and happening in the world, right? When you look at, one of my favorite things to talk about. Um, are the GLP-1s, right? So these are the Wegovys and the types of drugs that help people, the diabetes drugs that eventually that people found out was helping people lose weight.
Mhm.
And what we've come to find out is that not only is it helping people lose weight, it's helping people like drop other habits, right? So if you're a smoker, it's actually suppressing your appetite or your addiction for nicotine. All right. So it's doing a whole lot of things that's actually going to change people's health and their lifestyles. And the downstream effect of that is going to change so many other things, right? So it also means that when you look at the fast food industry, when you look at the snack food industry, all of those things are going to be impacted by that, right? When we get to a point where right now it's a subcutaneous drug, so meaning it's an injection, but we're going to get to a point that where those it's going to be oral or a
Mhm.
patch, right? I know that there are companies that are working on that now. So we get to a point where we have 100 million people just in the U.S. alone, right, that are taking these drugs. It's going to have a downstream effect on how it affects brands and how it affects them in terms of the consumption habits. How's it going to affect the clothing market, right? So you're going to have a
Mhm.
whole folks that are going to have to go out there and refresh their wardrobe, right, and their appearance, and then I think there's going to be um, a whole market around how do I keep this weight off. So you're going to have more people in the fitness cycle,
It's
right?
true.
Ever had, right? And even across airlines, right? So airlines are going to be affected because you're not going to have that many people carrying that much weight on their bodies. So this is going to change overall fuel usage, right? So a lot of these changes are coming, and I think that being at Ogilvy Consulting puts us in a position where we're able to provide insight and provide some directions and strategies for companies as they start to go through these bigger shifts.
It's cool because, I tell people a lot of times that when they ask about sort of background and things, When I was in college, I had a professor who said if you wanted to be good at marketing and advertising, become a student of popular culture. So I've always studied that. I know that you pay attention closely to what's going on in popular culture too, but you're kind of going one band even wider, which is what are the cultural impacts that will then affect downstream the impact on how brands can take advantage, and not in a negative, kind of like a exploitative type of a way, but from a positive, how do I utilize this? How do I respond to this even before it starts to get entrenched? So that's a pretty cool spot to be in, I would say, going forward. You must be kind of excited about it.
Oh, absolutely. Very excited because when you look at it, like you said, like brands are going to have to respond to this and react to this because at the end of the day, we're consumer driven economy,
Yeah.
right? So does that mean that the Doritos bags get smaller, right? Or what does that do to the price points, right? What does that do to clothing, to wardrobe in terms of like, the companies out there that have kind of like the subscription attachment piece to their athletic wear. So does that become something that's a bit more pervasive because
Mhm.
we have so many more people? But brands, everyone's going to have to respond and react to this because those are just some of the changes that are coming in the world, and we all know there's a lot more around the corner.
Yeah. Now, since you're going to be focused on AI,
Mhm.
AI has an impact right now on productivity.
Yeah.
And it also has an impact on everybody's fear centers in their brain, trying to get them to worry about what the future is going to look like. But let's just focus on productivity. Are there some other areas that you think AI is going to have an impact that brands are starting to take note of, or at least should start to take note of and start thinking about now?
A lot, right? When you look at it, I also look at it from the just how brands are able to build and develop products, right? So the supply chain, all of that's going to be changing, right? In terms of when we get to a point where when we get to a point where the back end and the supply chains and the distribution nodes that all tied together to create and deliver components for products, when they're all talking to each other, we're going to get to a point where someone in the morning is just going to wake up and they'll have a whole bunch of options on their screen. They'll just be able to tap, right?
Mhm.
So let's tap and say, this is this a price that you want from rubber coming from this part of the world to be here on this date? And right, so all of the back ends will be speaking. They'll be negotiating back and forth and routing supply chains, routing shipments, and having different dates in terms of when delivery will be made and how that's going to feed into the manufacturing process. So
Hmm.
all of it's going to come forward at some point on us, and I think that you know it's going to be really interesting to see how that builds out and how we play a role in some of that.
That's a I hadn't thought about that at all because if you go back and look at history of the last 5 years, 4 years or so, there's an
Yep.
interesting case study to be written about NVIDIA, right? NVIDIA is a big brand now. It really grew exponentially because of the focus on AI, so the chips that they build, but also the chip crisis that we had coming out of COVID, right? The more demand there was, their stock kept going up.
Mhm.
And it happened to coincide then with the sort of second effect of AI and the demand for chips that can do that. So it's interesting because that's an example where a brand ballooned in value because of the lack of ability to focus on logistics and sourcing materials and everything else. What you're actually doing is you're trying to give brands that information, or at least the knowledge to think about that information in advance so they can start to plan for it. And maybe, once again, NVIDIA might have been able to use that and take advantage of, okay, let's go do a brand campaign at the same time, but we didn't know about it at first. Like we could have planned for it. There's some interesting insights you can provide there.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that we're it's still early days for this technology, right? But at some point, we will be able to have pretty reliable predictive data coming from these platforms, right? So whether it's going to be on fashion trends and colors, or consumer electronics, or even on food, right?
Mhm.
We'll be able to use the technology to see around the corner and be able to build your marketing and your product strategy so that you can actually meet the demand when it starts to increase, start to come up.
Now you're that a lot of this conversation is you talking outside to the
Mhm.
brands. What about talking internally to the holding company and to the other agencies? Are you also helping them understand how to use these tools?
Yes, so there's a lot of that. So I think there's a lot of us working on internal tools, internal communications, internal training, and then some of it's still in the works. So some of it's still kind of like
Of course,
under wraps for now. But
that'll be a second time we talk. We can talk about that some other time down the road.
we'll save that for later. Yeah,
All
sure.
right. And then tell me about, what does success look like for you over the next year, 2 years, 3 years? Like, what are you hoping to achieve? Because you were doing some really cool stuff before and you were having a lot of fun. For them to, say, hey, I want you to come on board and do this, you had to have had a grand vision.
Yeah, for me, the grand vision is really about looking at how we're going to be able to deploy the tools that exist today, how we're going to be able to build technology and build different pieces of technology in-house to service the brands in a way that will make life easier for them and for their customers, right? For the
Mhm.
consumers, right? So it's really about figuring out what do we build, how do we build it, and who do we deploy it for?
Okay. And this is the kind of thing that you've always been into, right? You've always been interested in this stuff. What is it
Yeah,
that gets you excited?
oh, absolutely. I'm a sci-fi guy, but Star Trek, real sci-fi, not Star Wars, but
Oh,
but
let's not go there right now.
I know we would. So yeah, so I always looked at the future as being one where where technology is going to make our lives so much easier for us. I look at the platforms that are being developed today around artificial intelligence is going to get to a point, and especially with the processing power that's coming out now, and the advances in quantum computing, we're going to see the end to certain illnesses and diseases in our time, right? That's going to be interesting, right? Because meaning from a vaccine perspective, right? And the therapeutics that will be coming out of it. So that's going to be really amazing to see that. And the other part of it is, being a utopian futurist, is that I think that we have to get to the point, and I think that the technology is going to be able to give us some good insights around that. Get to a point to where we start to have more conversations around how do we use technology to solve for some of the biggest problems that have continued to plague society and plague humankind, right? We
Mhm.
still had the major tech moment um, around refugee resettlement, relocation, around the environmental crisis, around agricultural development. We haven't had those massive shifts like we've had with all of the major pieces of technology that we use every day on our devices, um, have that downstream effect on society, right? On providing education and providing, healthcare to a lot of people around the world that have been disconnected from not just the system, but disconnected from kind of like a welfare infrastructure in
Mhm.
their countries.
I mean, if you look at science fiction, you look at technology, and you look at media,
Mhm.
people love to talk about the dystopian future, right? The dystopian futurists are the ones who get all the headlines, they get all the clicks and the impressions.
Right.
Talk about a utopian futurist. How do you get people on board with that concept? How do you get them to say, no, this is real. This is something that can be done in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years.
Yeah, good question. Look, I think a lot of what we've done in the past 10, 15 years I think there was this massive emphasis on growth at any cost. And obviously, we have to focus on shareholder return because that's just what big companies do. And we have a fiduciary responsibility. But I think a lot of it was we didn't have the governance around it, which I think we're building around now
Hmm.
in regards to AI, right? So the White House came out with their executive order on AI, the EU's come out with theirs, and there's so many more conversations around the governance and the transparency into the models and the development around the technology. So I think that's extremely helpful because now you have more people that will be able to feed into these conversations. And then the other part of it is I think a lot of these companies, um, I'm not sure if they hired right? Meaning that you have to hire people um, that have a different perspective and different intentions and different desires from the technology, understanding and knowing that we all are responsible for running a business and standing up a business, but at the same time, we all have a bigger responsibility, and that's a responsibility to be the caretakers of community and society.
Hmm. Do you think there's anybody off the top of your head from a company perspective or even a country perspective who's doing a good job of starting to think about that?
I think the U.S. is doing a good job. I think the U.S.
Yeah.
is doing a good job. That was, that was pretty much spearheaded. The U.S. Executive order on AI was pretty much spearheaded by President Obama and signed into action by President Biden. So I think that was well done. And I think in the EU as well, they're moving pretty quickly in terms of being able to put the guidelines out there. So I think collectively we've done a great job. And I think what happens in the EU, because the companies pretty much have to build towards standardization to operate across all those countries, whatever happens in the EU typically gets deployed around the world.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's a good thing.
Your point of view is very unique, and like I said, I'm very stoked that we kind of got back in touch because we hadn't talked for so long. But you've always had a really good educational approach to all this stuff. What would you say to somebody who's just coming out of college now? They're thinking about getting into the agency space or into advertising and marketing. Like, what kind of things would you stress to them to start reading and start thinking about in addition to just the craft of advertising and marketing?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I look at it and say, read read everything, right? So and I can I think it'd be good if I can give you a follow-up list that we can post with the video in terms of some good books that are out there. So that's
Yeah.
one would be that, and the other part of that is there's so many different programs out there that that provide certifications, right? So you can get certified at different levels throughout around AI, the ethics of AI. I think that is very, very important for a young person, right? If you're coming to the space, you have to really understand the ethics of the technology and then start to get the fundamentals and the foundations of the technology. That's going to be extremely important as we go forward. A lot of times, a lot of these conversations, the recommendations that people make will be around coding, will be around development. I get that. But the platforms that are being developed today, they will reduce the amount of coding expertise that will be required going forward the next 10 years. So a lot of what will remain will be the desire and the need for expertise around deployment, ethical deployment, um, business development, business strategy, growth. How do we connect with consumers? How do we connect? Um, how do we create that emotional connection between the consumer and the creative, right? And the messaging around that and the follow up around that. So I think that those are the areas that younger folks, if they're coming into the space now, they should probably focus on that as opposed to, I'm not saying don't code, but learn that. But the emphasis around that, I believe, is going to change
Okay.
significantly. Yes.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
definitely think we should get that list of books and stuff, and I'll put it at the end of this video so people can see it and they can go check it out on their own.
Sure, I'll do that.
Well, Donovan, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time for this conversation. I know that we're gonna end up doing another one at some point, but
Yeah,
congrats on the new role.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, and I look forward to it, and I look forward to providing with a ton of new updates when we do that.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right. Thanks.